Good morning. My name is Braxton. I'm with UFLTV, and I'm here interviewing Grace Acosta. Hi, Grace. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit so everybody knows who you
Sure.
are?
I'm Grace Acosta. I am a practicing attorney in the state of Utah. I'm also licensed in several other states, but this is where my practice primarily is. I work in general litigation mainly. I also teach at the law school. I teach a class at the S.J. Quinney College of Law on arbitration and mediation. And that's what first got me interested in being a special master, which I've been doing now for the last couple of years.
Wonderful. Well, my questions are about being a special master, so that works out wonderfully. So let's jump into my first question. Um, would you define what a special master is in a Utah divorce or child custody case, and kind of what a special master does?
Okay,
Yeah.
so litigation can be very expensive, and sometimes it's very drawn out because the court calendar can be very busy, which means that if you file a motion today, you may not get in to see a commissioner or a judge for 60 to 90 days. And so sometimes when people notice and their cases are getting complicated, they might need what we call speedier justice. And so in those circumstances, the parties can agree, hey, we have lots of little issues that are bogging down this couple. Maybe we can appoint someone as a special master to help resolve some of the issues. And so a special master is just a title where basically you're asking someone, a neutral, to come in and help decide conflicts as they come up. So there's actually a rule of civil procedure. Rule 53 allows for the appointment of a special master by a judge. So the parties can consent, and usually what I ask them to do is to consent, and then I go over with them my special task and my powers, and then we present it to the judge, and the judge has to sign it into an order. Now, the judge themselves can appoint a special master. Like, let's say, for example, they notice that this couple's having a lot of problems. They've been in here for rather like who's picking up the child from school, or they're seeing troubles in mundane tasks, and the court can recognize that these people need a little bit of help. The court themselves can appoint a special master, but they have to articulate specific, like special circumstances, which would warrant that, and that needs to be done on the record. So it can be forced upon you, or you can agree to do it. Most of the time,
Okay.
people agree.
Okay. And do they assign a special master or agree to get a special master just in high conflict cases? Or is this more of you can choose to do it if things are just taking too long? Or, if the judge brings the hammer down, you get a special master.
All of the above. So most of the time we see it in high conflict cases because they recognize that, wow, we're spending so much time in front of the judge. The judge is getting frustrated with us and it's not fast enough for us. But there's nothing that says you couldn't do it in other cases, but you have to really trust the person that you're hiring to be your special master. I mean, think about it. A judge and a commissioner has gone through a nominating commission. They've been approved by the governor. They've been approved by the Senate. But a special master can just be anyone. Like, you don't even have to be a lawyer to be a special master or a certified mediator or arbitrator. You're just a person that was selected by the parties to act in this capacity. So, yet most people are just not willing to abdicate all their power to
Yeah.
just Joe Blow off the street. So most of the time it doesn't come up unless the lawyers in a case recognize, oh, this case is complicated enough, it could benefit from a special master.
Okay. Um, you spoke a little bit about the authority, like the power that they give up. How does that differ from a judge? What is the kind of the width of the authority that a special master has in a
Okay,
case?
if the special master can have whatever authority the parties provide that person with, which
Okay.
means it's like a contractual right. You could actually ask the special master to make substantive rulings, and then those will be binding, except that the judge would always have to go through an analysis to make sure that what they're doing is legal, ethical, and in the children's best interest. That's always going to be an overriding concern of the court. So even if the parties all agree that we're going to do something, if it's not good for the kids, the judge can probably intervene and stop it. Okay, actually, not even properly. I know they can. They can stop the process. But the parties can decide how much power to give a special master. So I've had special master cases where I'm just dealing with parent time, but I'm not dealing with custody. So if we're fighting about who picks up the child from school and whether or not it starts at 3 when school is out, or 6 or 5:30 like it says in the statute, or things like that, that's total parent time. But I can't change custody. I don't have the authority to take to say now mom and dad have joint legal when before mom only had legal, or whatever the situation is. So it can be as broad or as narrow as the parties want. And sometimes the judge will limit me too. Like he'll be like, well, you're getting too close to doing my job. So I'm only going to limit you to dealing with like these issues regarding discovery. The parties are fighting over what documents do we have to produce and whether or not the new husband's tax returns are relevant and things of that nature. That's a perfect role for a special master, to help alleviate some of the burden from the court, because you can see that if you get too detailed into an analysis, that the court is going to be bogged down in your case. But you can delegate certain tasks that the court knows are going to be cumbersome, and a special master is a great person to delegate that to.
Okay. So you talked about high conflict cases being kind of the most fertile ground for a special master to be
Yes.
found. Um, what is your kind of approach to resolving the conflict in these high conflict cases?
Okay, well, I figure by the time they've come to me, they're really frustrated, and a lot of it is the lawyers are probably fatigued too by the parties, and so they really need my help. So I try to be as neutral as possible. I have a phone interview with both parties, trying to get a feel for what the relationship's like, what's been happening, what are their primary concerns, get some examples of things that happened in the past that they were unhappy with and happy with, so I understand a little bit about who they are, because some things that might drive me crazy may not bother you at all. And or so one parent can be like they're absolutely never going to watch an R-rated movie even if they're 17, and the other parent could be like they can watch it as long as it doesn't have sex and it's just violence, whatever. So then I have a feeling for what both parties are thinking. But my role is to bring them to some sort of agreement, or just sometimes if they can't agree, I just decide. So I always say to them, all right, well, I'm leaning this way. Would you guys like the opportunity to resolve this among yourselves? If not, my decision may make both of you unhappy. And I try to be extremely responsive. So if you call me at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, hopefully we can resolve that issue by 3. Which, as you can imagine, I am a practicing attorney. I have my own cases and my own clients. So it's very demanding, but I take phone calls on the weekends, on Christmas Eve, because I'm supposed to be the person they go to if they can't work it out themselves. What I notice is that they don't always like my decisions. And so they learn to say, ooh, self-regulation is a lot better than having this basic stranger just decide these very intimate and detailed aspects of my life. And so it helps them grow, if you will, and learn to co-parent, because I share with them, well, this person said this and you said this. Based upon the evidence in front of me, I believe this is what's in the best interest of the kids. And they don't always like it. So, but
Yeah.
always self-direction is better. And so through time, I noticed that the people use me less and less. And I don't think that's a product of them not excuse me, it's not a product of anything other than they are learning to co-parent, which is such an important part of being divorced.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine people up in arms at the beginning of a divorce case and then kind of uh, becoming exhausted throughout the
Mhm.
pendency of it just because they don't want to fight about little issues anymore. They just want to get the big stuff resolved and then have it just done away with. Uh,
Right. And I often tell people that, so just because you don't have to be a good parent. So people often say to me, I can't believe that they're letting her eat processed foods or go to McDonald's. Like, this has come up before. And I'm like, listen, there's no law that says you have to be a great parent. You just have to like not kill your kids. I mean, you have, so
yeah,
the bar is pretty low. So you saying they must eat organic and dad saying it's okay to go to McDonald's, neither one of those things you should die on that hill. That doesn't make
yeah,
any sense. I mean, like, just understand that your children are flexible and they're adaptive. And in your house, they can eat organic, and in dad's house, they can eat junk food. And guess what? They're probably not going to die. And so pick your battles. And I find that one of the things that controls people the most is my bill. So when I bill them, they're like, oh, yeah, Grace, you are costing me money. So now you're paying your own lawyer and you're paying me, and maybe you're paying a guardian ad litem as well. So that becomes very expensive very fast. And again, people self-regulate once they realize they don't like the cost of having me decide things.
Yeah, when the juice is no longer worth the squeeze, they're like, maybe we don't need to always bring up every little petty thing.
That's right.
Maybe, we can
Yeah.
be adults about certain things.
And we
Uh,
also learn not to do tit for tat, right? That's a ridiculous way to run your life.
yes.
If you're keeping a tally with all your friends and families, you'd have a very miserable life. And you would end up just being unhappy because you're
Yeah.
fighting with everyone about every little thing. Sometimes you have to say, my kid, I don't like that, but I don't think it's going to harm them in the long run. And when they come to my house, I'll feed them organic, or I'll say, let me tell you why I don't like you to watch R-rated movies. You're just too young. And let me tell you and it promotes the relationship change too. So, you know, everything's a growing experience.
Absolutely. We touched on this earlier. The best interest of the children. Sometimes parents can make decisions, and if it's not in the best interest of the children, or the case, the judge might, disagree completely and veto that. How do you ensure that the best interest of the children is met while you're a special master on a case?
So just like I would as a lawyer, so lawyers have to wear double hats in family law, if you ask me. They are advocates for their clients, but they also have to understand that they are stewards, if you will, of the children involved in the divorce proceedings. And so even in my practice as a normal divorce attorney, I do not make decisions or encourage my clients to make any decisions that I think are not in the best interest of their children. Obviously, I think that would be morally unsound, but also it's legally unsound, because if I make some sort of representation or advocate for a position that I know the judge is not going to allow, well, then I'm wasting everybody's time. So as a special master, it's always paramount in my mind, and I express that to the parents that I'm dealing with. I often say things like, well, how do you think this is going to affect your child? Or what things do you think how do you think this will benefit your child? Or how do you think your child is going to respond to this? And most of the time, by prompting that question, the person self regulates and understands, okay, maybe I am seeing this kind of mean. Maybe I should let my daughter go over to dad's house, even if it is his girlfriend's birthday party, because all of her cousins are going to be there, and it would be sad for her to miss. So I can't even tell you. It is the most important thing for me when I'm making every decision, because I think it's also the important thing for the court. If, for example, we sign a contract too with me, just like you would with a retainer of a lawyer, but it delineates all of my powers. If you are dissatisfied with the ruling that I make, then you can always appeal it to the judge. But of course, we're trying to discourage that. So one of the ways in which I discourage that is by letting the parents themselves be involved in the decision process, hopefully letting them process the pros and cons, and then they understand my reasoning as opposed to just dictating from afar. Um, but the judge can always override me. I am just the parties consent to me, if you will. So it's like a contract. But if the contract has a provision that says if you really don't like it, you can go to the judge.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how these high conflict cases can really get kind of petty, or you spoke about how um, in the beginning they kind of hit the special master button for everything and then learn
Mhm.
not to. Is it hard for you to stay neutral in these kind of high conflict cases? And how do you remain neutral when maybe you don't really agree with one side's position or the other, or maybe they go against your beliefs or any kind of like moral standings that you have?
Sure. Well, it's easier because it's not my life. I mean, they're not my children that we're dealing with. We're dealing with someone else's. So I'm always able to have at least a distance that gives me perspective. Um, I wouldn't be a special master for my own divorce. I'm not sure if I could, but I definitely wouldn't solve my own problems the same way. Neutrality is going to be very important, because at any point in time, I could be terminated. And so if the parties believe that I'm not being fair or they don't feel they're being heard by me, then they could absolutely terminate my employment. So I am conscientious to let both sides tell me their stories. I'm conscientious to listen to both sides objectively. I try to be as concrete as I can. So when someone says he never does this or she always does this, I'm always like, can you give me some examples? Because words like always and never are usually not supportable. And so, what specifically has motivated you to say that? Can you explain to me, give me some logistics of what's been happening in your family so maybe I can understand your position? And I listen. And sometimes I share with the other party what the real concerns are. Oftentimes, the motivation for the complaint is not apparent. So, like, say, for example, I'm very upset about letting my daughter go over to a party at for my husband's new girlfriend. That was the example I used before. But what's really bothering me is that I feel like she's trying to usurp my role as a mother. Right? That's the real problem, not the birthday party. So oftentimes I try really hard to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes because maybe then we can address it. So we can say, hey, he's agreed or she's agreed to let her come over to your house for the birthday party for your new girlfriend, but she'd like to have next Sunday to go to the movies with the daughter so that they can do so it's some sort of tit for tat, but the motivation behind the behavior is almost more important than actually what's going on because we're complicated. Like humans are very complicated and we have big inner worlds. And sometimes we don't even know what's motivating us. So my job is to listen and try to figure that out so I can address it. And always I find when I do that, I get a better result because both parties' actual needs are being met as opposed to what they think they're fighting about.
Wonderful. And so you talked a bit about you're able to make rulings, and sometimes these people don't like them, and if they don't like them, they can terminate you. But what happens if you make a ruling and they just decide, no, I don't care what ruling you made, I'm just going to go do my own thing or do my own thing? What kind of actions can you take to kind of keep them to their word?
So there's a couple of things. So I remember I have a special master's order that authorized me to act in the case. So oftentimes that order says things like the parties shall follow the recommendations of the special master unless they believe it's not in the child's best interest and they've presented the matter to the court. So you can file a motion to enforce. Does that make sense? So now I'm not a party to the action, so I can't file a motion to enforce. But one of the parties can enforce the court's order,
Mm,
which enforces my ruling. Now I can imagine a situation where a special master goes off the deep end and orders weird stuff. The parties can say we're going to ignore this person and terminate them. So the parties can always try to find consensus and say, you know what, special master, thank you very much for your recommendation, but we disagree. And we've come up with this solution. As a special master, I would always say, absolutely. Please follow your solution rather than my solution. Just but unless I thought it was dangerous, like let's lace our water with LSD and give them to our kids, I would be like, that's not a good solution to the problem. But I would always endorse the people having self-direction. It's always going to be easier to comply with if you've
yeah.
picked it yourself. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and if you can support a decision that is made jointly by people who do not agree, that's probably a lot better than bringing the hammer down on yourself, bringing your own
Yeah.
decision into the mix.
But in reality, as far as enforcement, I don't have a lot of power. I don't have a lot of power. It comes through the Rule 7 motion to enforce 7A motion to enforce filed by one of the parties to enforce the special master order. Now, let's say, for example, there were specific things we wanted to have reduced to an order. We could do that. The parties could then I reach a ruling, and then the special master could recommendation could be presented to the commissioner and the judge for approval and reduced to a court order. And then at that point in time, you could definitely do a motion to enforce as well.
Right. Have you ever encountered a high conflict situation that has escalated beyond your control, just absolutely fallen off the deep end? And how did you kind of handle that situation?
So if I do not, so I've had situations where the relationship between me and the parents has fallen apart for whatever reason. Sometimes there's mental health issues that come up. Sometimes it's, someone has had committed domestic violence and now we have criminal issues that make it improper for them to communicate even through me. It's really complicated if they have protective orders, etc. Um, you just do the best you can. I mean, there's really no answer to that question other than I hope that I could intervene and help them along the way so it doesn't escalate. I would definitely, in my repertoire of tasks, would be not to escalate the animosity. So if mom's like telling me he's an idiot, I don't like him, and whatever his girlfriend is blank, 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 I'm definitely not going to share all of that information with dad. I would be like, well, mom's concerned about having the girlfriend be around. These are
Yeah.
just common. Yeah. So I'm very careful about not just making them mad at each other because my goal is to try to make them both sound reasonable and actually be reasonable.
Yeah. When you make a finding, we talked about this a little bit earlier. When you make a finding, like this is the evidence that I have, I've talked to both sides. How do you communicate that to the parties and the court? Do you file something in the case? Do you hold like a hearing, quote unquote hearing? How does that?
So it depends on how big of an issue it is. If it's a real big issue, like we're really talking about, like can Sally go to Europe on her senior trip and dad has to get a passport and they both have really strong feelings about it, I might actually hold a hearing where we would all come in together by Zoom and we would present their cases, and the rules of evidence actually are supposed to apply under Rule 53.
Okay.
And so I would listen to testimony like any other judge, and then I would write out a ruling. But most of the time, it's not anywhere near that complicated. It's usually things like, no, I need to pick her up because our flight's at 7. I can't pick him up at 5:30. We have to be at the airport at 5:30, so I need him to give me access to the child at 3. And I'm like, yeah, and I just decide, yes, you can do
Yeah.
that. But usually, what I do is I call the person that's with holding and say, why? And they're like, oh, because she's in a play at her high school. And if she leaves at 3, she leaves the entire play hanging. I'd be like, well, you guys should have worked this out a little bit better before. But I get that. I mean, I would balance two equities, and we can have her do it and make the flight. I mean, and if not, can we book her on a later flight? Why didn't you guys talk about this before? Or whatever is the problem. I just sometimes it's just by email. Instead, so one person says, hey, they haven't paid this bill, even though I've talked to even though I've tried to do it. And this person says, well, I've called and they won't take my credit card. Well, sometimes I'll just call the dentist and be like, what's up? Can you please pay this bill? And then I go, okay, you can pay the bill now. And I just send them an email. So it can be very informal if it's just an issue that comes up, or it can be very formal if the parties literally want to present evidence and argue about something that's more substantial. But most of the time, I'm living in the realm of you guys really should figure this out. These fights are not, but they're very important to people, and because the communication is broken down between the parents, I'm there to help bridge that gap. And sometimes just having someone step in and just be and listen on both sides makes them be like, well, I was thinking the example of the theater and the flight. I was thinking that if we're waiting for her, the minute she leaves, she can have her bags packed, mom can take her luggage to the airport, and then if I run really quickly from Alta High School to the airport, we can be there in 35 minutes. So the last time she could leave at this date. You figured it out yourself. You didn't
Yeah.
really need me. You just needed someone to say, hey, is there a way to figure this out that both of you guys can be right? As opposed to the poor child not being able to go on vacation and not be able to be in the play.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. That was the last question that I had. Can you tell people where they can find you if they're in need of a
Sure.
special master, or if they need help with their
Absolutely.
divorce cases?
Yeah, so I am a divorce attorney as well, but I've noticed that I like doing the special master work. Hopefully, from this discussion, you've seen that I'm a very practical person. I really
Yeah.
try to approach my job as a problem solver and trying to make families happier as opposed to less happy. But I am an owner and partner at Trujillo Acosta Law. We are absolutely a bilingual firm, by the way. We all speak Spanish as well. I speak Spanish as well. And our phone number is 801 690-9139, or you can email me at grace@tagteamlaw, TAGTEAMLAW.com.
Wonderful.